Hi, everyone, and welcome to Newlab's Return to Work discussion about how Newlab reopened its space safely and evolved the pilot program to accommodate additional challenges raised by COVID-19. I'm Alexandra Bacchus, and I'm part of the partnerships team here. Many of you might be familiar with our work, but others may be encountering us for the first time today. Thank you for joining us. If you learn one thing about Newlab during this discussion, I hope it's the way we're committed to applying transformative technology to some of the world's biggest challenges. The discussion will be moderated by Shaun Stewart, CEO of Newlab, and he will be joined by Jarrell Guzman, Newlab's Director of Time and Space, Alexander Winter, CEO and co-founder of Norbert Health, Neal Cooper, Principal at Derive Engineers, and Marcel Botha, CEO of 10x Beta. A few housekeeping notes before we get started. Our panelists are looking to field questions from the audience, so to ask a question, please use the Q&A button on your screen and I'll help get those in front of our panelists. Newlab is home to a growing community of entrepreneurs, inventors, and engineers, which Shaun and Jarrell will get into. We support over 150 companies made up of 800 individuals working across tech domains like robotics, materials science, connected systems, additive manufacturing, quantum computing, AI, and more. We also work with government agencies, Fortune 500 companies, and researchers, and are deeply invested in multidisciplinary collaboration. With that said, Shaun, take it away.
Amazing. Thanks, Alexandra. I appreciate everyone joining us here today for the discussion. Really, I'm just going to start off by kind of giving you an overview of why Newlab had to open and operate throughout the kind of COVID-19 period of the second quarter of 2020, which in short is our community of over 150 companies and 800 technologists, researchers, and entrepreneurs, many of which were deemed essential tasks and businesses for the COVID-19 response. We had projects, everything from the creation and production of over 1 million different face shields in partnership with Bednark, the Spiro effort, which produced north of 3,000 ventilator alternatives for New York City hospitals, which Marcel and the team at 10x Beta can talk to quite closely today, all the way through a range of businesses that were working on government contracts across the Navy through to NASA. And as a result, we had to open the community and our facilities much earlier than many New York City businesses. The result of that is we've had more time and more experience to understand the challenges of operating during a COVID-19 kind of environment. And today we're here to have our second part of the Return to Work webinar series and to talk about what we've learned, what the experience has been like being in Newlab since April, and what we are now going to do moving forward based on the insights developed. And so with that, I'll hand over to Jarrell, our Director of Time and Space here at Newlab, who manages all of our day-to-day operations and has been our go-to expert in regards to the return to work and opening strategies deployed. So over to you, Jarrell.
Thank you, Shaun, for that introduction. So yeah, when we began to plan for reopening our building, we asked ourselves two key questions. The first one was, what protocols should we have in place to facilitate a healthy and productive environment for our community? So those 800 entrepreneurs and inventors who are part of Newlab, and what technologies could we use could we leverage to enhance safety? So out of that initial exercise, we developed a program that rests on 4 key pillars. And those are listed here: contactless screening and density monitoring, proximity management, air quality control, cleaning and disinfecting, and an infection mitigation plan and contact tracing. So let's dive a little into those details. What does that program look like today? So here on this video, you can see a snapshot of the entry experience at Newlab today. And it starts before entering the building. Members can complete a health screening on their mobile phones, which asks them key questions, just so that we can assess if they should be coming into the building. As a result of completing that questionnaire, they receive either a pass or a fail result, and they can show the answer to a certified emergency medical technician, who you can see here on the video as well. The next step is that the person moves to have their temperature taken at a distance with a device provided by Norbert Health. And Alex Winter, who is here with us today, is going to elaborate a little bit more on what the device does. The temperature is monitored actively by the emergency medical technician. And the technician also uses a contactless thermometer in the event that we need to conduct additional screenings. So sometimes someone will come into the building, their temperature will read above 100.4 Fahrenheit, which is the threshold. And then we conduct additional questions after that to assess if the person really has a fever and determine whether entry should be denied. We can move on to the next slide now. Once a member is in the building, they have the opportunity to check out a StrongArm Fuse proximity device. And so this device, which you can see there in the video, emits a visual or a haptic, that's a vibratory alert, when the person comes within 6 feet of another person. So many of you now know that 6 feet is the distance, the minimum distance that has to be maintained between 2 people in order to prevent infection. And so the StrongArm proximity device does that quite well. So someone can wear the device on a harness on their body throughout the workday, and it serves as a consistent and constant reminder to maintain distance. It's very easy to forget to maintain distance. The other piece is like not everyone is aware of what 6 feet distance is. So that particular device addresses that problem head on and pretty seamlessly. If we move on to the next slide, then we'll talk about it a little bit more during the panel today with Niall. But really, air quality is a key piece of our program now, or air quality monitoring. So new research has been emerging recently that confirms that COVID-19 is airborne. And in light of that, then we began to just work with Niall in particular to figure out, okay, what is our baseline now? What are the areas of risk within the building, and what should we be doing in order to enhance our heating, cooling, and air ventilation system in order to enhance it for safety. In addition to that, we revamp also our cleaning and disinfectant procedures. So we increase how frequently we clean spaces, and doing so with products recommended by the EPA. Now we can go on to the next slide. We're lucky in New York, not lucky, but it was really through a lot of hard work that now the infection rate in New York State is averaging below 1% for the past 20 days, which is quite remarkable for our city. And although the risk of infection is lower now, having an infection mitigation plan in place is crucial, really, in the event that there is a reported infection within your community. So what you can see here on this slide is a snapshot of the report generated by StrongArm to help us identify which persons in the community are at risk of an infection because of extended interaction with others. However, because the StrongArm program is optional for members, we also needed an alternative to conduct contact tracing for everyone in the community, not just those who are participating in the Fuse management program. So today, our plan is that if we learn that someone has tested positive, we conduct contact tracing according to the guidelines published by the CDC. So this involves asking the person who tested positive with which other persons they interacted with for more than 15 minutes in the past 48 hours. And then after that, we do both a cleaning protocol that we follow, and then also restrict access to the community for at least 14 days. We have been lucky that since we opened on May 11, we haven't had any positive instances in the community, but we feel confident that if we do, we are prepared to manage it. So if we move on to the next slide there, just to summarize, what are the key takeaways really from this first 90 days of running the Returning to Work program? Involve your community early, that's key. Folks right now feel very anxious, and rightfully so. So what we did is that we actually sent out a survey to all CEOs in our communities and the Newlab team as well, because we wanted feedback on that initial plan. We shared with them, we allowed them to comment, we revised it and optimized it based on the feedback. And then we went ahead and implemented that, but not until we had community consent. The second piece is to define the key metrics that you have to review daily. This is not the type of protocol that you develop and just kind of put to sleep. It's a protocol that has to be consistently revised based on new guidance, on new research that is emerging. And so there are key metrics that we follow every day closely, which we'll discuss later in the panel. Implement dry runs. Of course, it's not possible to cover every scenario that you could potentially encounter, but there are a few scenarios that are possible. And so having, kind of dry runs of those is important. 100% adoption is required. This goes to, in particular to the StrongArm Fuse management platform. So again, we think that if that solution is excellent, right? Very seamlessly allows us to conduct contact tracing and then put in place reminders for proximity. But if not everyone in the community is adopting it, then it's not as effective. Initially, we had 80% of our community sign up for the program, and then we kind of saw a decline after that. So that's something to keep in mind, and we want to be open about that. Addressing privacy concerns, of course, with there's technology involved. Norbert is blind to identity, StrongArm is blind to location. So just being very open about what data is collected through those devices and sharing it out with the community is very important to put folks' fears at risk and then address any concerns. Air quality is crucial, and I'm not going to say a lot about that because Niall is going to tackle it later in the panel. But again, as more research is emerging that confirms that COVID-19 is airborne, it's very important to have an expert that you can rely on to consistently monitor and optimize your air quality program. And then lastly is managing density. So we keep a very close eye. Every 2 hours we monitor how many people are coming into the building, and then we also do walkthroughs through the building and get community feedback. What are places where there is congregation? Are there areas that we are overlooking? And the key takeaway here is that you're running with a program that has to be revised consistently. So with that, I think then I'm going to flip it back to Shaun, who is going to introduce us to the panel.
Amazing. Thank you, Jarell. Appreciate that kind of summary to get everybody up to speed on the journey we've taken here at Newlab over the past 90 days. I think I'd start with Alex, everyone's turning on their videos. So if we start with Alexander Winter, like the daily temperature screening obviously has become one of the most common methods of identifying infections, looking for temperatures, those early signals, the 100.4. But if you look at the way people can get infected with COVID-19, temperature is not the only early signal that someone might be testing positive or be testing positive in the future. What are you doing about this at Norbert Health? What are the other ways that people have been able to identify early infection? And can you do that same level of tracing of infection with your technology?
Yeah, thanks, Shaun. That's a great question. I mean, there are other signs of infection that are typically show up earlier. One of them is obviously coughing, right? So you can set up Norbert devices in common areas and detect dry coughing. We're actually partnering currently with universities and research labs to collect specific COVID coughs. Right now, our device can detect coughing and dry coughing specifically. We're going to iterate in detecting specific coughs, and that's an important one, right? What we realize is typically people don't want to infect their coworkers, right? So if they feel sick, they're just not going to go to the office in the morning. But they can start to feel sick during the day, and that's where you want to detect these situations. So coughing is one. Heart rate variability is another one. Of course, you cannot just use one of these signals to decide if somebody's sick or not, but you can use those signals as to triage people who are potentially sick, and then they should be talking to the EMT who's on site, and then take action or not.
Got it. No, that's helpful. And we can see Alex is actually in Newlab. Marcel, looks like you're in Newlab today as well. Your team, you're just opposite Alex too. Your team obviously had to be at this space from mid-March onwards, thanks to the efforts regarding Spiro, the partnership with 10X Beta, Boyce Industries, the New York City EDC. Talk to us a little about getting your employees comfortable with the program developed, how you kind of made them feel like the approach in returning to work was safe, and also why they had to, like, why couldn't these people work from home? Why was it imperative to have a functioning space like Newlab?
Yeah, I mean, we have, I think Spiro was one of those things that it's a once in a lifetime ask where you have to show up and behave like a skunk works and we barely went home for 30 days. And this happened while the rest of the city and the country were not able to really get comfortable with the risk of even seeing their close family. And I think that first, I'll answer those questions in reverse. Why did we have to be in the same space? Because for Spiro specifically, we needed to do extremely high-speed prototyping and production validation, and we were using Boyce headquarters as our ground zero for that production. We did shuttle up and back and forth between Boston and New York to do validation testing at 2 discrete labs in Boston. We also had one commitment with the Navy in Bethesda. So there was the constant movement, but normally you would rely on third parties to move people, Uber, car service. What we did very quickly in the beginning to manage risk was understand vectoring, understand the science of airborne transmission. Everyone wore PPE, gloves, masks. Everyone we had the drivers, the professional drivers who drove us around during that development phase were assigned to the project from day one, and they were the only drivers we interacted with the entire period. Or we drove ourselves, or we had one of the Boyce employees drive us around in the RV. They have what they call the rover. Back of the RV. And then getting employees comfortable. We have a small team. 10x Beta is a high-speed R&D team. We did have one employee get sick. Then she got sick before we even started, so she was isolated already. Our team went off-site 2 weeks before the city instituted their stay-at-home orders, so we were prepared. In terms of getting people comfortable, two of our team members did not want to participate in Spiro because they were not comfortable, and they worked from home on other things, and they managed themselves for 3 months. The rest showed up at Newlab or at Boyce in person, and we couldn't have done it without being there in person. So we just had to understand very quickly what degree of protection and risk management we had to put in place from the very get-go. All of the efforts that are now at Newlab since the reopening year were also present at the factory location for thermal screening, health screening, and constant cleaning throughout the space.
Amazing. Yeah, it's very helpful. And so, Niall, you're hearing kind of all of the approaches to contact tracing and heart rate and temperature readings to make employees feel safe that it's time to return to work. But then, as Jerome mentioned, you're starting to see insights that the virus can be airborne, that this is actually moving in contained airspaces. And so the strategy around airflow becomes equally important to the strategy of contact tracing and kind of temperature checks and readings on entrances. What have you learned over the past 90 days working with Newlab and in general about airflow management in a COVID-19 world?
Yeah, thank you, Shaun. It's been really interesting to watch just how slowly and how tentatively many of the bodies have actually acknowledged this risk of airborne infections with aerosol, which is maybe in some ways kind of a shame. But I think now you realize that it really is here and it's a real risk. We're talking about, not just droplets that hang in the air for a few seconds or a minute or two. We're talking about, tiny particles that hang in the air for minutes, if not hours. So then you're moving into a position of having some bodies previously back in June and July saying there was no evidence of aerosol distribution, and that the risk of infection through recirculation through an HVA system was very, very low indeed. That's clearly not the case anymore. So that puts ventilation and the systems providing ventilation to the forefront of all of our COVID mitigation discussions. And that's been where Jarell and I have been starting our conversations on our studies on the Newlab building in these past few weeks.
Got it. And so then obviously with contained spaces, one of the most challenging ones would be bathrooms, which a lot of CDC reporting analysis has showed high contamination rates in bathrooms. Alex, one of the early challenges Jarell mentioned was providing insights into the occupancy of bathrooms. You can tell people you can't have more than 3 people in a bathroom, but how do you know how many people are in there before you actually enter the location? Can you talk a little about how Norbert has helped with that challenge and what technologies can maintain privacy, but also give that type of insight to keep people safe?
Yeah, sure. So, you also want to limit occupancy in conference rooms, right? But you have windows, so you can easily look inside and not go if it's too crowded, right? Bathroom is a different story. Usually you don't have windows, hopefully, and you don't want to put cameras in a bathroom, right? So people don't like that, and you don't want to do that, right? So you need to have camera-less people counting systems. So our devices include a radar imager that actually can count people, so detect the number of people that are in a room. We can't really image them, but we can tell, you know, how many people are within four walls, basically. So, and we can do that from the outside of the room. So, and outside or inside. So we have set up one of these devices in one of the bathrooms here at Newlab, and we're finalizing that system right now, along you know, with Jirel and her team, to come up with a very accurate measurements. And once it's done, we're almost there. We'll put a sign or some visible indication of, can you get into the bathroom now or not? You know, outside of the bathroom.
Got it. And with both of these products,
sorry, we have an audience question somewhat related to this, around how can these protocols, you know, presumably including bathrooms, be applied to an office building, because that could go a long way in reopening the economy.
Got it. Yeah, we should maybe start with Alex. Like, is there any of the technology deployed at Newlab that would not be relevant to a standard office building? And then love to hear from Niall and Jirel as well about which of these insights are still relevant to a different structure of workplace. Yeah,
so it was very exciting to be part of the Newlab community, because like you said, Newlab was a pioneer in reopening or keeping places open. So, and I think right now, everything we do is applicable to any kind of other office space, but also other kind of businesses, like construction sites, healthcare facilities, schools. We actually have our devices in all these kinds of places right now.
Got it. And Niall, like you can see, Alex has Newlab behind him. It's a 90-foot ceiling. It's a very expansive building. How does the insights and learnings from an airflow perspective change when you can go from an abandoned Navy Air Force hangar to actually something that's more akin to the New York City office building?
Yeah, I mean, so Newlab is definitely an almost unique space for sure, but it contains volumes inside of it that are very scalable to a regular New York City office. So, you know, our study overall does show that Newlab is actually really quite well ventilated mechanically, better than a lot of other its contemporaries, and it has the great added impact of having a lot of openable windows. So the perimeter zones are easily boosted with additional ventilation in those areas. But it does also have a lot of you know, smaller internal meeting breakout spaces, and those are the ones that we're definitely homing in on as being the kind of higher risk areas at the moment.
Yeah. And Newlab as a building has been completely renovated and refurbished in the last 4 or 5 years. How does building age kind of alter the capabilities when it comes to airflow, and how?
I mean, yeah, that's a very interesting point. So the systems obviously are radically different throughout the whole of New York City, and we are dealing with looking at a number of schools, for example, going back, you know, this very week and next week, have a wide variety of very aging infrastructure that perhaps can't tolerate additional ventilation the same way as Newlab is going to be able to. Like, systems sometimes just don't have the capacity. So, you know, that then changes how you approach your COVID mitigation response to each and every space, depending on how it can handle that increased ventilation requirement or desire.
Got it. No, that's helpful. And so, Jirel, you've been involved with consulting for other types of return to work locations, different businesses. Have the insights from Newlab been relevant to new employment locations that you guys have partnered with? And what additional kind of insights have been found as you've worked with other locations?
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, I think that addresses the question that was raised in the chat very directly. And so we were lucky that we were able to support our community so early and kind of really test pilot the program that we had in place. What we have found is whenever we have inbound inquiries, is that the program is very replicatable elsewhere. So generally, there are a few baseline questions that we would want to ask. We want to look at the facilities. We want to look at how many entry points there are, so that we can tackle folks as they are coming in the building, because those are the key areas. And so right now, one industry that we have seen a lot of interest in our program is kind of film and production. So if you think about it, the film and production industry is almost like organized chaos, where you just have a lot of multiple staffs and players trying to put this production together, and you could have elements of construction there. So there are crews that are actually like building sets or breaking them down. So how can you provide a solution there for proximity? And so there's been a lot of interest in the StrongArm product in particular. When we're thinking about folks coming into the building, how do you conduct temperature screenings in a way that is not going to create a backlog when you do that? And the Norbert Health device does that very well. I think also an added plus is that because we have been able to test it here, we can actually deploy quickly. So I work with Alex on a recent project actually, and just in a matter of a couple of days, we were able to go ahead and set up. It was a matter of sending the field technician in to inspect the premises, put on the device, connect to Wi-Fi, and we were going likewise with StrongArm. So those are some of the pluses of what we have learned here and how we could replicate it elsewhere. And I invite, if there's anyone in the audience here who is kind of struggling to figure out, hey, how do I reopen my space? Can I also leverage these technologies? Please reach out to us. We're happy to talk to you guys and kind of put our heads together of how to help you also bring your workers back to work.
No, that's very helpful. And from a contact tracing perspective, you mentioned it kind of briefly in your overview, but let's give just a more of a concrete example. So I was at Newlab yesterday. I was wearing a StrongArm sensor the whole day. Now I go home and this morning I wake up and I've got a temperature, I got a cough, I've got a range of symptoms that make me concerned. What are the capabilities that you now have, Jarell, for contact tracing? And what are the actions that you then take regarding, obviously, my return to work, but also anyone I could potentially have exposed?
Yeah, absolutely. So there are two things. First is what we do on a day-to-day basis. So StrongArm is set up to generate a daily report where we can see the proximity profile of all the users of the platform. So there we see what is the average interaction in the overall community. The good news is that we have seen that going down over time. And then the second piece is, were there any interactions between those users that were greater than 15 minutes? And it's not cumulative. It is every instance of a 15-minute interaction is going to put you and the community at risk. Now, in the event that, the scenario that you described, let's say someone does test positive, then how do we use the report? There's another report and then StrongArm can generate within 24 hours, actually, that lets us see, okay, within the past 48 hours, how many people did this person interact with? And of those interactions, how many were 15 minutes or greater? And those are the ones we're going to be honing on. And so once we identify then the individuals who fit that criteria, then we go ahead with outreach, right? So we do outreach and then we let them know that as a result of potentially being exposed, then community access must be restricted. And we do that in order to just protect the greater community, right? And then we have protocols in place to go ahead and restrict access for the 14-day period that is recommended by the CDC, and also work with our team to identify what areas of the building that person was in that generally just requires more dialogue with the person, or using things like security cameras, for example, to identify those key areas, and then deploying our team to go ahead and disinfect using also the CDC protocol.
No, it's really helpful. And Marcel, as you kind of brought back employees and maintained morale, people wearing sensors is certainly one level of privacy concern. There was discussion around apps that we could install on people's cell phones for contact tracing. Where is the range of reaction to these approaches from a privacy perspective? And kind of how did you enable your employees to feel safe about the protocols and approaches being taken?
Yeah, we have quite a range of individuals in the office, right? From the ones that don't want to wear a sensor to the ones that forget to wear a sensor, right? It's like the whole perspective. To the ones who don't want to sign an NDA when they walk through a door or a waiver. So, I think I made it clear to the team that it's a collaborative effort for 10X to be able to wrap up our work for the ventilator project, and then to ramp up our work to become sort of a leader in terms of how one might do product development at the same or higher pace than we did in 2019. And for that, I needed the team to invest and contribute intellectually to how they want that set up. So we invested in air recirculation and filtering equipment inside our office. We expanded the capacity for segregated seating on the 2 floors that we have at Newlab, and so no one needs to be crowding their neighbor. We just have 6 feet, just about have 6 feet between individual desks, and anybody that wants to work from home whenever they want to can. There's not a requirement to show up unless you're working on physical prototyping. Now, the majority have chosen to show up in person. 2 of my team are working remotely, and we have a whole South African team that are working remotely and have done for years. So it's in terms of the product development flow, it's worked well, and the team has taken ownership of managing safety.
And so these approaches, Niall, that Jarell talked about are all in hopes of contact tracing, quarantining the right people, seeing who spoke to who for how long and where. Airflow is a lot different to that. It's very difficult, obviously, to contact trace where airflow has gone and how that can factor into quarantine protocols. What is your guidance working with companies on this aspect of it? And has there any kind of insights so far that have been valuable?
I think our approach is always to start to try to do the best with what you already have available to you. And that comes right back to ventilation again, as opposed to changing actual airflows in spaces deliberately. I think there is a lot to be said for considering the seating arrangements and aligning those with the infrastructure you already have so that you're seating people in line with clean airflow, as opposed to deliberately placing them in rows so you have people on people on people, perhaps. But I think you starting with ventilation from the idea of trying to increase it. Most systems can be increased a little bit, if not through mechanically, then through opening windows and running it that way. And then from that perspective, you move into looking at improving your filtration on the HVAC system. So hopefully MERV 13 or maybe even MERV 14 if your systems can tolerate it. And while that won't stop an unattached virus, it'll absolutely stop viruses attached to other things, taking just down some of that risk a little bit of, now we know it's airborne and potentially recirculated. And then after that, you're looking for more risky activity in spaces and enclosed spaces that perhaps aren't ventilated so well. And combining those two, you have people gathering a small enclosed space that's kind of has some heated, robust conversation in a meeting or mask down activity for eating. That's a higher risk layered over a risk anyway. And that's when we have to look at buying some other kind of technology.
Yeah.
So a question here around education around some of the more technical processes that go into this. What role does that play in kind of like the general public who's using this technology but doesn't quite know how it works?
So the question was just about how you train and educate the community and the people impacted by the technology on a rollout. So maybe that's best for Jarell.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So our approach, again, was first, just speaking of our community, to develop a very, we have 2 versions of the plan. So we have a version that is, kind of very simplified and really gets to all the key protocols, and it includes a description of the technologies that we have in place. And then also for those who want to have more information, there are just folks who want to become more educated themselves, then we have kind of like the longer version that we share. But for us, it was key to send communication very consistently at the beginning. So every time we actually reopening phases too. Every time we added in a new cohort based on New York State's reopening guidelines, we would send out new communication. And a key piece of information also that we use was an FAQ, and the FAQ is still live and we update it quite frequently. So anytime that we received a question from the community that we thought, oh, actually this question must be in everyone else's mind, we would go ahead and add it over to the FAQ. And our focus was to use very simple language, but very simple language in kind of short sentences, but really address the questions that were being raised.
And what transparency was needed day to day on the building itself? Like, do you have to share how many people are coming in, how many temperatures are above 100.4? Like, how do you get people comfortable that their environment is safe day to day, and what level of transparency was provided?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we created a very simple, what we call a live dashboard, but it's really a glorified spreadsheet. And then in it, we show every day, every 2 hours, how many occupants we have in the building. And so if you are planning your day and you're very concerned about, density in a space like ours, then you can go ahead and check that live dashboard and then see, okay, this is how many people there are in the building already. And you can plan, you can check in with yourself and your own level of comfort as to whether you want to come in. So we include that information, and then also if there are any entries denied, we don't publish temperatures, of course, we just say, was there anyone that was denied because they came to the door and then were found to have a fever? Or was there anyone who tested positive in the community? Luckily, we haven't had neither of those situations. Every person who's come in the building has been let in the past. We haven't had anyone with a fever. It doesn't mean that this will not be the case in the future, but yes, that is the kind of granular pieces of information and data that we share with the community so they can be empowered to make those decisions on a day-to-day basis.
Got it. And some of these pieces are trying to alter behavior of people in the space, like the vibrations and light alerts of a StrongArm sensors to get them to distance more often and be aware of their distancing. Niall, I was curious, like, are there behavior changes you want to make in communities in regards to airflow? Like, are they supposed to be more aware of this as a potential contamination vehicle? Do you want to change their behavior? Or is this something that they shouldn't even know is happening and you're just dealing with it on the back end?
That's a really interesting question. So I think there's like two sides to that. One is like, I think if you provide them with so many indications that things are being made better and therefore safer for them, is there a risk that they abandon their own mask protocol in a way that is highly detrimental? So I think I would say that I definitely want people to be aware more and not terrified, but aware, and so that they are, placing themselves in positions that are better for themselves and better for others. And I think that's just, that goes throughout, really. I think there is a danger of that. We know we can't sit back and do nothing. We know we can't sit and add every single technology and all the bells and whistles to every space, because it would be completely unaffordable and could potentially drag you towards people behaving less safely. So I think it's just trying to strike that right balance. And I think that balance is probably different from even inside a Newlab than it would be inside a school, for example. I think. Yeah.
And the data and insights, like Jarell can look at how many people came in the building, how many had temperatures at this level or that level, how many distancing alerts. We heard they went from 8,000 distancing alerts in the first week to 400 a week within a month. Like, just crazy behavioral changes there. What are the tools that people look at and manage, or data points when it comes to airflow? I know we're kind of putting you on the spot, but like, how do they, once a system is rolled out, how do they know it's working? How do they manage it on a daily basis?
Yeah, I think that's interesting. I think so. I mean, I think the systems that are in Newlab right now don't give you, any feedback other than perhaps carbon dioxide in some areas, and that's an indication perhaps of of one element of air quality. It doesn't give you particulate content perhaps. It can maybe give you an indication of stale air in a space. But I think for the areas we're going to look at, perhaps improving or adding some of the mitigation measure too, that's going to be actual physical systems that you can see being wheeled in and operated. And I think there'll be a very clear protocol for them to operate those devices as and when they need to inside the more enclosed spaces. It'll be a very physical thing, and in some cases, audible too. These things will make a noise. We haven't really, and what I'm talking about here are the portable disinfection filtration systems or portable recirculating HEPA scrubber units for those kind of higher risk areas, the more enclosed, perhaps less ventilated and riskier operation spaces.
Yeah, it makes sense. And so, Alex, with Marcel talking about concerns around privacy in regards to people wearing sensors or installing apps on their phone, like, as you've developed a product for Norbert Health, which is taking health vitals from a distance, how have you dealt with privacy concerns?
Everything is computed on the device and basically thrown away, once it's been consumed by the EMT who's monitoring what's happening. So we don't store any information there, any personally identifiable information. So you can't get back to identity using our data. I think in some cases, though, some people would want to, associate temperature check or health check with access control, for example, in which case, a system like ours should be able to, connect with an access control system or HR system in a larger company to enable that kind of interaction.
Okay. No, and if you look at the New York City averages versus Newlab, New York is at about 11-12% return to occupancy, I think was the figures last month. Newlab, Jarrell, you mentioned, is at north of 60% kind of occupancy return to pre-COVID levels. What are the factors you think that have led to that return? Is the community and the employee base different to an office tower in Midtown Manhattan? And also, which have been as a result of the protocols and strategies that you think provided comfort for those employees?
Yeah, I think it's probably a combination of all those factors that you mentioned. And just to highlight the example that Marcel gave earlier, right? His team is a rapid, what do you call it? Like a rapid, agile R&D team, right? And I was talking actually to Mike Morena, who works with Alex Winter, and he was telling me the other day, it was just how difficult it is when you are developing a physical product to not be present with your team. You want to get on a whiteboard, you want to be able to draw things out, you want to be able to problem solve in a more live manner. And that largely describes our community here. It's people who are making products, transformative technologies that have a lot of physical applications. And so folks want to be together as a result of that. It's definitely virtual interactive tools have improved and matured a lot during the pandemic also, and folks have gotten more used to that. But there's a lot to be said for those in-person collaborations. So I think that's one factor for sure. Our community is more work in the office as a result of the work that they do. But yeah, I want to think that the program that we have put in place, because we enlisted community input early, and because we have made an effort to be open with our communication, and even a lot of us sit on the open floor plan with face masks on, and a member can come and walk up to us and then ask questions, or tell us when they notice that there are certain things that are not going well in their view, and we can address them right away. So that combination of factors then has led us to be remarkably at 60% of our pre-COVID occupancy numbers. That's, when I look at the New York City rate, Shaun, as you mentioned, 11% in your typical commercial real estate office, and we are at 60% of pre-COVID numbers. I do think that having kind of a very strong program in place can help with that and just ease some of that fear.
Yeah, no, that's helpful. And as you think about like whether this is short-term versus long-term change, like as we look to the office of the future, I guess, like Marcel, you're an expanding and growing company. You've got more and more employees. Does this alter how you look at offices of the future, your strategy for space in the future? Or is this a short-term thing that you assume doesn't alter your overall kind of office park strategy moving forward?
That's a really good question, because when I did we've been part of Newlab since the beta space, like in February it will be 8 years, and our space needs have evolved over the 8 years, and even within Newlab we've almost doubled our space, and when we invested in the latest iteration of the space, it was like, yes, let's have space for 20 to 24 people, 2 levels, pack them in. And all that thinking is gone, right? So how can we maintain 12 people safely in between the 2 floors, and which of those do need to be in the office, which of those don't need to be out in the office? And so how I'm thinking about space the next 5 years is there's the development space and keeping that safe. Do I need the luxury of space? For some things, yes. For other things, no. And like most of our contracting and global offsite teams will not go back to offices. So the guys in South Africa will not be in an office ever again. They will be working from home because they're working remotely already. As the company owner, I've also set my office at home such that it's a complete duplicate of what I have here. There's nothing I can't do there. I'm limiting my reason for being in the office. except for seeing the people and managing in person and touching prototypes and testing them. We also may this asynchronicity that we bring, Mike's point about serendipity in product development is very real and raw. That's like the biggest thing. Like you can't, we've been working with Alex and his team for 6-7 months, and actually probably closer to 9 months now. And the thing is, you can't do work as fast and as effectively if you're not whiteboarding and you're not relying on that water cooler moment or that kitchen moment to figure out simple things. And so everything relies on asynchronicity. And then in the early stages of onboarding and getting back to work, it was, how do I do this safely? Because of the contact, the data suggested that the virus will linger for up to X amount of hours. And it was really tricky to manage space and people and products while developing an understanding of these vectors. But yes, when it comes to real estate, I think we're the biggest that we're ever going to be. I don't think in terms of space. If we build other spaces, they will be discrete and functional to manufacture, and we'll invest in automation and American manufacturing as far as we can, given what we've learned from the last 9 months.
Yeah. And Niall, is that the same for the HVAC airflow world? Like the offices that are being designed today to be constructed tomorrow, are they drastically different to a pre-COVID world of design and approach?
There's definitely a few different schools of thought in there. A lot of our clients are looking to see what kind of these COVID mitigation measures could be built in upfront by design, which is clearly something that's going to be incorporated in a lot of systems, coming out in the next year or two of construction. There's a lot of talk about the size of spaces that would be required by various tenants, and conversations about, do people now need twice the space, or do they need a quarter of the space because the vast majority of them are going to be working from home? And that's super dependent on, I guess, the kind of tenants that some of our clients are looking to employ, and it goes either way right now. I feel like human beings want and desire to be closer to each other, and the outcomes are better as a result. And that the whole serendipity thing is true. It's true for almost anything you can do in an office. So I think that's going to drive people back to the office. It is the kind of current sense, and that will mean that perhaps a little bit more thought goes into design and spacing, and certainly more into HVAC design. But the buildings will continue, obviously, to have people in the city. So
yeah. And Alex, sensors like yours, temperature readings, heart rate readings, bathroom occupancy monitors, is that a short-term thing, or are you seeing people looking at like permanently installing that type of hardware in offices that they're designing now?
No, I think we're really seeing a big change in health in the enterprise down the road. And we see the devices, being there down the road for sure. What's happening to health in the enterprise post-COVID is all like what happened to security post 9/11, right? It really changed the way we do things, profoundly, and in the long term. That's how we see it.
Yeah, and Jarrell, you obviously hope that 3 years from now we're not taking temperatures at the front door. What operational changes from this period will live on and continue to exist, or improvements that you want to have, those permanent improvements to how we operate, versus what are the pieces that would peel back over time, you feel?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. And I was talking to also Alex's team, to Pat on Alex's team on this, and we might see actually more of an employee reliance on the office to provide healthcare services. So that's something that could be here to stay. When you think about, for instance, all of the time that you have to waste to book an appointment, to go out of your way to just get your regular medical checkup, what if that were provided in the office? So, maybe this pandemic could be kind of the baseline or the impetus for what's to come next. On that front. But yes, it's definitely a focus on figuring out what services we could provide to prevent infection in the workplace. One of the areas of focus for us right now is figuring out, well, what do we do as we get into flu season? and the possibility that we could have a second wave of COVID-19. How do we address that? So, okay, we have the COVID-19 now, we have the protocols in place there, but then what do we do? So now we're talking about, for instance, bringing in a flu clinic here. We're working on that right now, so that then folks don't have to go out of their way to get their flu shots, they can get it here. So when you think about the office space providing those services to employees who have to be present and minimizing the risk of infection or else, that could be a way in which the office can evolve rather in the future.
Yeah. And there was a question before about office towers and Midtown Manhattan and elevators. Like, have we had to, I guess for everyone, elevators seem like a pretty unique and daunting challenge when it comes to social distancing and air quality, a lot of these pieces we've talked about today. Have you seen, and we'll start with you, Jarell, but like, is there elevators at Newlab? Have we had to do anything with those? And have you seen or learned of any approaches that are helpful for those considering elevators? And same for Niall on the HVAC side, Alex on the biometrics, Marcel on the employee side. Like, I was just curious for any insight that the audience has been asking about elevators, as that hasn't seemed to be a key part of what we've talked about today.
Yeah, in a space like ours, we have a pretty open floor plan with just 2 floors and a single elevator. So that made the job pretty easy for us. But we're talking about a skyscraper in Manhattan with, 100 floors, and you're trying to shuttle people up and down. That's a greater challenge. I'm not aware if it is a good question of, any kind of interesting technology to address that other than very simple, we only limit capacity to come into the elevator. But I don't know, maybe Niall has some insights there because, for instance, like hospitals have used UV technology. You and I have been talking about ionizers, for example. So we see elevators, like another example of an enclosed at-risk space, getting hens to be able to facilitate the movement of more people in that enclosed space, but safely.
So I think a lot of these HVAC mitigation measures are quite scalable, actually. And so we have seen some manufacturers rapidly moving towards, understanding that's going to be whatever we do inside of the various spaces, that's a fundamental, choking point there, like getting people in and out of those spaces is a problem. So there are people that are manufacturing little baby disinfection filtration systems. And we do have a client that's going to be going ahead and we're going to be installing kind of cab mounted, like on top of the roof of the cab, just to recirculate around that cab air and trap as much as you can. So allowing you therefore to feel better about putting more than 2 people in an elevator at one time. And then we have some other clients saying, well, that's it. It's just 2 people in the elevator and that creates whatever queue it creates.
Yeah, Marcel, Alex, anything on the technology front or anything that's been relevant in regards to bringing people back into elevator systems?
Alex, why don't you go first?
Well, no, I was going to say, Marcel, why don't you go ahead first?
Sure.
That's a tricky one,
I mean, we've been looking at, while we were looking at the ventilators, we also were looking at PPE fulfillment for a lot of cities and states. One of our partners were looking at that, and we were looking at everything from positive air pressure systems or these PAPR masks to filtration systems to specialty materials. So we've been embedded in a lot of thinking around personal protection, but also into spatial protection. Like if you are going to install filters, what's the frequency of use? If you are going to install UVC decontamination or pass-throughs, how do you keep it safe? How do you apply that to packaging, or how do you apply it to elevators? On the elevator side specifically, we've not invested any R&D time there because we typically would like to tie that to projects. But we, in our space, we invested in obviously this fresh air, but also filtration and ventilation. We've not done. We do chemical cleaning, but we have not done UVC sterilization, for instance. Yeah. And then it's like I feel like I've experienced a couple of elevator moments where the lines are forming, and any transition point where you cross a threshold, whether it's an elevator to go up a building or in a building security, everything's slowed down to a snail's pace, and that's not sustainable. I think all the technologies that we're seeing now were with the hopes that we can pre-screen and self-report and verify, like a combination of good citizen plus interacting with the good corporation to keep everyone safe and to do that in a validated way. I am seeing some interesting things in rapid testing coming down the pipe, saliva-based testing, smell, olfactory testing, because the smell verification requires, or actually is 3 or 4 days ahead of a fever detection. So if you, that's interesting technologies that are coming down the pipe. But the question is, as Alex mentioned, how does all of this tie into the access control system? And then for on the StrongArm side, how does that tie into your interaction and your spatial management system? So like, this is a person, they were not sick this morning, they are sick tomorrow. Where do they go? Who do they interact with? And how do we keep them and their business colleagues safe?
Yeah, and I would add, let's keep in
So
mind
that's it's a user experience layer that's missing still.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say that also keep in mind that it's really prolonged exposure to viral chart that is dangerous. And I think you want to statistically avoid that. And I think elevators, back to your question, Shaun, ideal spot for health, vital sign measurement. So we're excited about elevators to put sensors there, and then make sure that statistically will reduce dramatically the amount of exposure you can get to a virus, but you can't reduce it to 0.
Yeah. Yeah, I appreciate you guys jumping in on that one on the fly. I know we didn't prepare to talk about elevators, but it was a good audience question. Well, with that, I think we're up to our last minute. So Alexandra, unless there's any remaining audience questions, I just want to thank, obviously, this entire panel for joining us today. I know you guys are busy, obviously, across a lot of different efforts. Thank you for your efforts in returning the Newlab community safely. And we appreciate the audience joining us today to talk about this. All right. Thank you, everyone, and we'll speak to you soon.
Thank you so much.